Welcome to Journalism 217, Feature and Editorial Writing at Durham Technical Community College. In this first week, we'll go over some of the basics of journalism, starting with why writing is important. Then we'll talk about the differences between academic and journalistic writing, the different types of print journalism, and finally, some tips our textbook authors have for young professional journalists just like you. Before we start talking about journalism, I want to spend a little time on why writing is so important. Marquette University in Milwaukee's Writing Across the Curriculum program offers some great advice on the importance of writing. First, for better or for worse, writing is the primary basis upon which your work, your learning, and your intellect will be judged, in college, in the workplace, and in the community. Now, everyone is good at something, whether it's writing, biology, social work, cake decorating, or car repair. Now, if you aren't a good writer, if you spell words wrong, if you write in run-on sentences, or use improper punctuation, people might assume that if you can't write well, then you can't do other things well. That's obviously not true. But taking this class, you can learn to be a better writer and help to earn more respect. Writing out your ideas permits you to evaluate the adequacy of your arguments. Now, have you ever had to have a really difficult conversation with someone, like asking for a raise at your job or ending a romantic relationship, and you found yourself practicing it beforehand? Now, going into the conversation, you might have taken some notes with you so you could remember the key points in your argument, whether it was how well you handled a difficult customer or how your partner always leaves the dirty dishes in the sink. Now, looking at a list of 5 reasons why you are an excellent employee can help you realize that you are indeed an asset to the company. Or maybe that you need to work on your arguments before meeting with your boss. Another reason Marquette University offers that writing is so important is that writing requires that you anticipate your reader's needs. Your ability to do so demonstrates your intellectual flexibility and maturity. When you write, you think about the questions your readers might have, and you learn to answer them in your writing. Now, there are a number of other reasons, like being an essential job skill, that writing are important. And you're welcome to check out the resources page at the end of this lecture and read all of those reasons for yourself. By now, you're familiar with academic writing, writing papers for English and other classes. While similar, journalistic writing is a bit different, so we're going to run through some of those differences. First, there's the length. Now, academic papers are typically measured by the number of pages. Journalistic assignments, at least in this class, are done by word count. That's because there's a printed newspaper, and in it, there's a limited amount of space to print that story. Now, according to a 2006 report from the Pew Project for Excellence in Journalism, the average article length at the New York Times is about 1,200 words. Now, that's about 5 double-spaced pages. It makes that 10-page paper in your other class seem a bit more difficult than journalism. Now, paragraph length is another key difference. Academic writing has longer paragraphs with multiple ideas presented in a single paragraph. Paragraphs are way shorter in journalistic writing, typically only 1 to 4 sentences. And sometimes a paragraph can be just 1 word. The words themselves are also longer in academic writing. An academic paper might say the protagonist suffered from a melancholy distemper. A news story would say the main character was sad. Now, academic writing also relies heavily on secondary sources, books and journal articles about a specific topic. Now, these sources are typically cited in the text using parentheses or footnotes, with a full bibliography at the end of the paper. Now, journalists use more primary sources, personal interviews with those directly affected by a news event, and cite their sources in the text using the source's credentials, such as, "I'm just glad no one was hurt," Joe Swanson, Quahog Police Department officer, said. Journalists also use secondary sources like government documents, police reports, or even other newspaper articles to supplement their personal interviews. And academic papers typically follow APA or MLA style. Journalism follows the AP style, that of the Associated Press. Now, we'll get more into what that means in our next lecture. There are even more differences between academic and journalistic writing. First, the audience for your research paper is typically just your instructor or others in your research field. Journalists write more for the general public. An academic paper is meant to prove to your instructor that you can apply course concepts. The purpose of a journalistic assignment, however, is to inform and to entertain your readers. The focus of an academic paper is usually on ideas and relationships. A news or feature story, meanwhile, centers more on people, places, and events to help tell a story. And finally, academic writing presents information with a thorough explanation of evidence to help prove your thesis. Journalistic writing presents information through vivid description to help invoke feelings and mental images. Just as not all academic papers are the same, neither are all forms of journalism. First, you have newspapers. Now, these are typically daily, weekly, or bi-weekly, and what we'll focus on most in this class. Now, these have very strict deadlines, as once the paper goes to the printer, you can't go back and add a story later. Newspaper news is therefore very timely, focusing on recent events. Next, you have the magazine. These are typically published weekly, monthly, or sometimes quarterly. Magazines offer more longer form journalism and have a much longer time between deadlines to craft stories. Magazines also write more feature pieces. It's difficult to print more timely news-focused stories in magazines. Finally, you have what our textbook calls business-to-business periodicals. We would better recognize these as corporate publications, news targeted to customers or employees of a certain company. Now, regardless of where it is printed, journalistic writing can be divided into three main categories. First is your news story. As I've already alluded to, these are stories focused on current events. Your features are typically more in-depth stories on the people or issues behind those current events. Now, while a news story might talk about rising healthcare costs, a feature would offer a glimpse into the life of a family without health insurance. Next is the opinion story, still grounded in facts. These are first-person commentaries. Now, you might argue that I'm missing a very important part of any newspaper, but I assure you, the sports section is actually a combination of news, feature, and opinion stories, all focused on a singular subject. Finally, Hicks and his co-authors offer a few tips for journalists in the first chapter of our textbook that I want to share here with you. First, make a plan before you start writing. What story are you trying to tell? Who will you need to interview? What other resources might you need? Write straight onto the keyboard. Now, Hicks argues that it's a waste of time to write things out longhand and then go and retype everything you wrote into the computer. You don't have to start every story at the beginning and end it at the end. Type up your notes to help get you started and work from there. Revise, revise, revise. Now, Hicks just offered 2 revises, but I think 3 is more appropriate and more accurate in journalism, as your first draft is rarely your final one. Finally, you want to master the basics. Understand how to organize a story, choose the right words, use quotes, and create a compelling story for your readers.